Well, good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome to the third year of the Sales and Marketing Director Incubator. My name is Mike Dixon, Director of Sales and Marketing and the Category Practice for AXR Recruitment and Search. Now, we set up this incubator program back in 2020 to help sales, marketing and category professionals just better understand their career paths to make great career decisions and also to get more out of their professional lives. What we didn't expect was the niche that we identified would be so hungry for content. So it's been brilliant to see over 2,500 people take part in the live sessions. We've had over 15,000 downloads on our podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing. And in this year, in 2022, we've got another 20 awesome leaders to present to you guys our sales and marketing world. And we can't wait to tell more career stories and also impart some really unique insights. And this year, we're going to do things just a little bit differently. Each episode will have more of a theme. And today, we're going to tell the amazing story of how our guest, Trish Pegorer, Managing Director of Mutti Australia, has led the business from, I don't know, like a little cherry tomato to one of Australia's fastest growing and most successful FMCG brands. Welcome, Trish. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you, Trish. And really enjoyed working with you over the last few years, Trish, and seeing the business grow and no hesitation in having you on as the first guest this year to talk about that journey, the business, and how you've done it, because your background is not a traditional FMCG background, Trish, and we've emailed your bio around to everybody, but you haven't come up with, the classic FMCG, training route. You've done it differently, but my goodness, it's been successful. So we'll get into just how you've done it and how the business has gone so well as we go on. But before we do, as always, we start with a couple of icebreakers just to get to know you a little bit better. I'm going to be consistent this year and ask each guest the same questions because I'm really intrigued as to the answers. So the first one is, what is your favorite brand? And you can't pick Mutti.
Oh, okay. So I'd say hands down my favorite brand at the moment, it has been for a while actually, is the toilet paper brand Who Gives a Crap. They've managed to innovate in a very, very staid commodity category. They've done it tactfully and tastefully. They've brought a level of humour to a taboo, I suppose a topic that no one generally speaks about. But they've also got a sustainability slant. But I think for me, the biggest point that I relate to is their the social purpose that is at the core of the brand. It really does appeal to my philanthropic side. And I think they've taken a need-based purchase and turned it into a values-based proposition, which people can actually connect to, which I think has been brilliant. So that's my favorite brand.
No, love it. It's amazing when you look at some categories and you think that there's a mature category. How do you disrupt that? How do you create something different? And well, I think Mutti's done that as well in a different kind of a way. But I think they've done an amazing job there.
Agreed. I think, I do have that affinity there with seeing what Mutti has done in a not obviously in the toilet paper space, but in tomatoes. It's a brilliant brand. Yeah,
it is. And for those of you who will visit our offices in the next year, we've refreshed them. We've got plants, hence in the background. We're also refreshing our rooms, and the whole theme around what we're doing with our rooms is to create a bit of fun. But each room is going to be themed, around a job that you dreamt of as a child. What did you want to do what did you want to be growing up? And each room is going to be quite unique. So I'm going to ask you that question as well, Trish, because I think as children, we always have this aspiration that, with no inhibitions, with no sense of career paths, you look out in the world, you think, oh, I want to be that. For you, was it something?
You know what? I found this is a really difficult question because I think back and I actually don't recall dreaming of a job. Not that I didn't have dreams, but I grew up in my father was a migrant from Italy. He came out here when he was 15 and he started his own business when he was 21. So I think for me, I was exposed to that level of self-starting and business from a very young age that I think I just grew up implicitly wanting to be like him. And if I look at my siblings, we're all very much the same. We all have worked for ourselves for a number of years and have this self-starting attitude. So not that our family never fostered dreaming or dreams, but it's I look back and I think, yeah, I just had this influence where all I could see was how to make something for yourself, and that's from my father.
Yeah, cool. No, it resonates with me. My family were all very entrepreneurial. My dad had started his own FMCG business. He was an accountant, interestingly, but set up a smoked salmon company when salmon was just becoming big and farming was around. I know it's kind of potentially a challenging industry nowadays, but it was really cool. And I got involved in all this kind of business growth stuff. I remember getting out in the middle of the night to unload fish lorries when I was 14, thinking, what am I doing here? But that was just normal.
It's invaluable. It was really invaluable. So huge thanks to that role model.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, let's get into your career and Mutti, Trish. Well, let's start at the beginning in terms of, you went to Sydney Uni. You're now MD of Mutti, but how did it start off for you? What was the first kind of job you did post uni?
So post uni, I worked for ACP, Australian Consolidated Press, in advertising sales. So it was an interesting story, actually. I was fresh back from a 6-month trip in London that I did straight after uni. I came back full of confidence, waltzed into the ACP building in Park Street in the days where there was no security, so you could just walk in and peruse the levels. And I literally went level to level and handed out my CV into any office door that was open, and found myself a little while later interviewing for an office executive position at Dolly magazine. And I spoke so much about food in that interview that they said, you know what, I think you should go up to level 10 and speak to Gourmet Traveller magazine. So I literally took that, went out the door, up the elevator to level 10, and found myself sitting with the editor, Carolyn Lockhart, which is crazy because, here's this busy woman with very limited access, and she had time for some little upstart that was perusing the ACP building. So her advice to me was go across to the marketing department based on my background and my university degree. So not knowing the difference at that point, so naive between advertising and marketing, I've walked across the corridor and gone into the advertising department and said, hi, Carolyn has sent me, do you have any jobs going? And sure enough, I started there as a direct sales ad rep for about, I think it was 1 year in that job. I then took, bizarrely, some time out to the dismay of my parents, because I was just out of uni 4 years. I'd been 1 year at Gourmet Traveller, and I was a bit confused about what I wanted to do because it wasn't exactly hitting the mark. So I decided to take a break, and I went to study a diploma in clothing production, which is completely random. I think for me, it was about wanting to exercise a part of my brain that was maybe a little bit more, stagnant after doing a 4-year commerce degree. And that inadvertently let me back into consulting in marketing. So I had taken on a client at Gourmet Traveller magazine. So a couple of years later, they contacted me and asked if I could help with their marketing as they were expanding their brand. So I did that for a number of years. Interestingly, that role, the company was Sandhurst Foods, and they were at the time and still are quite a significant food service business, and having a retail proposition as well. So I was working closely with the CEO on marketing aspects, but we started to gravitate towards the retail offering and looking at how we could potentially expand the offering in the majors that they already had. So he and I kind of set out to really tackle this challenge because neither of us really had the experience in dealing with the majors in a significant way. So we spent about 3 or 4 years starting to tackle this challenge, and it was quite interesting because we really did just work it out together, and it was a very invaluable period in my career. All the while during that, I took on a couple of other clients and went into partnership with a friend of mine who together we set up a small consultancy firm offering sales, account management and marketing. So we acted like an external marketing department for small businesses that didn't have their own internal capability. And we were quite young, you know, so we were very confident, we're very, you know, willing to just give it a go and getting results. And, you know, I think businesses really gravitated to that. And then, like any good Aussie, I, after a number of years, went to London, worked for a few years on the advertising and marketing agency side. And I think at that point, that's probably 8 or 9 years into it, my career. And I came back from London, had my first child, and it was about 6 months into it where I started to get this itch to, you know, the part of my brain that was getting completely overrun by the newborn started to say, hey, there's another part of your brain that needs a little bit of activity. How about it? So I started to get the itch. And that's when, interestingly, Sanders came back into the picture and said to me, there's this brand Mutti that we're distributing in the food services sector. And they're potentially talking to Coles and need some help with their proposition. Would you, you know, can we put you forward? And I thought to myself, yeah, sure, why not? Tomatoes, let's give it a go. So it was literally starting a couple of hours a week, chipping away at the first proposal to Coles. And it was interesting because I think my curious nature said, okay, Coles want this one particular product, but what about we do this? And if we do this, perhaps if we present a compelling case and then we have potentially 2 or 3 products on shelf, we can create a range story. So the wheels really got turned in motion. And I think the rest is history, because that's just how things have unfolded. It went from a couple of products in canned veg to what about the pasta sauces and passata category, and starting to chip away at that, and then looking at expanding customer base. And next thing you know, I'm just building this business. But I think it took me quite a while to work out what the brand was about and what I actually had in my hands, you could say. Because
fantastic,
yeah,
Trish. It's amazing how everyone's journeys are different. And but what I love about yours is it's really self-discovery, and it's actually just you know trying and putting yourself out there, and but there's obviously a real curiosity just to push. And for those who don't know Mutti, but perhaps just to give us a context as to what does Mutti do today, where does it fit in the market?
Yep. So Mutti is a producer of premium preserved tomato products. They're the #1 brand in Italy in that sector. They're also the #1 brand in Europe. So they have a very long standing. They're a 123-year-old company. But really in the last 30 years is when I suppose, transformation for the business has occurred, and their growth trajectory has been phenomenal, and when they became leader. And the main reason, and this probably talks to the question of how do they fit, is 30 years ago when the current CEO, Francesco Mutti, took over, he came to the company with a very simple premise. And for me, the premise is rooted in the value of respect. And his premise was, if you could take a perfectly ripe tomato and process it and package it and maintain that quality, if I can do that well, then I can put that out in the market and consumers will taste that and decide for themselves that this is true, that this is a good proposition, and they'll continue to buy it. So I think in that regard, that came with a lot of investment in terms of setting up from end to end through the supply chain. How do you transform your offering as a business, which is pretty much the antithesis to how the industry works in tomato processing. It's about value and volume and cheap price, where he's gone, I'm going to invest a lot of money to set up processes, invest in my farming partners. And if I do this well, people will recognize and continue to buy. And that's a year-on-year investment. And it's paid dividends in a big way. So yeah, Mutti fits in the sense that they've taken this commoditized category, and Italians, I suppose, being the custodians of industry of processing tomatoes, they've managed to take that and elevate status in that, at that level, which has been, a game changer for the industry. So they've pretty much broken through the ceiling of what the industry norm was and created this best in class that no one thought they knew they needed, but everyone's absolutely gravitated to. And, you know, you see the trajectory of the company in Italy and in Europe, and we're following a very similar path as people, you know, in that premise of people, you can't fool people. People know what they know when they taste what they love. And they say, that tastes different. And we don't convince them that it tastes different. They're the ones who decide for themselves. And I think that is the premise of how the brand has gained so much momentum. It's a pleasure to see happening.
Yeah, well, you know, as a consumer, once you try it, that's it. You're an easy convert. And if for those people on the call or on the podcast are kind of going, I haven't tried it, you know, once you do, you're not going back. There's no way.
It's crazy when you think about it. It is just a tomato. So we always get blown away by people's passion and enthusiasm, and we're like, guys, it's just a tomato. But it's not just a tomato. It's extraordinary, and it is, you know, it's a bit of a game changer.
Completely. How do you compete against the larger established FMCG? So I get what you're saying, Trish, around the proposition is different, but you know, you're against some huge FMCGs in a really established, mature category, and yet you're like this rocket ship of growth, you know. So you know, how do you kind of, you know, look at who you're up against and think, yeah, we can take you on?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, we've got the weight of the Italian headquarters behind us, so that we have the full weight of functions and all layers of business from the CEO down. So that obviously is a huge piece. I think secondly, we focus on what our strengths are. So we're not ones to ever go out and promote others' weaknesses to elevate ourselves ahead of that. And, you know, as personally, that's the value I hold as a human being. But that's one that we, as a company, we never do, never step on someone else to elevate yourself. So I think it's just a matter of, we focus on what our strengths are. We focus on what that can bring to category as a contributor to growth. We have the commercial proposition, I suppose, that we hear our customers say is required and is needed, and we understand what their strategies and goals are. And I think, you know, if we listen, we're good listeners, but then we're good providers as well. So I think we've managed to deliver on a proposition that our customers have said would be beneficial for category growth, and talks to a particular consumer. And yeah, it's been, it's not, I was going to say as simple as that. It's definitely not as simple as that. But yeah, it's something that our customers have really gravitated to, because we can deliver on multiple objectives for their businesses. Yeah,
because Mussi's grown so quickly. You know, they're I'm not sure where it fits in Australian growth trajectories, but it's going to be one of the fastest growing brands in Australian FMCG, which is tough because Australian FMCG typically, COVID aside, you know, is reasonably stable. It's hard to get rapid growth. But how have you gone so fast?
Have we gone so fast? It's a good question. We have had, before COVID, we had a very big groundswell, and I think it goes back to that point I was making before about once you try it, you as a consumer, you're making the decision. You know, that's the power of choice. You know, we give people the mechanics to try through promotions and through, you know, advertising and marketing, but once they try, they decide if they're purchasing again. And that groundswell has really been evident in the years pre-COVID. And going back to headquarters, and when the Italian market started to really shift in the early years after Mr. Mutti implemented these changes to the processing and went about fulfilling on this vision, the groundswell there was the same. So word of mouth very much was a propelling force. So I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, we did start to see the groundswell as people started to buy and then share and advocate, and in both food service and retail alike. COVID then put rocket boosters on that, because people were at home, they're cooking more. They potentially, in some cases, have more disposable income to buy something slightly more premium, or potentially their brand was out of stock, so they had to try us because there was no choice. Yeah. A bit like toilet paper. So I think for us, the growth has been propelled very much so in the last couple of years. But another big factor is that we have had an incredible amount of support from our key customer partners. who have seen the momentum and then backed us to say, right, let's partner, let's elevate together. So that has been an incredible privilege, to be honest.
Yeah. And like any business, whilst the journey from the outside looks incredibly exciting, and I've been privileged to play a small part in it as a recruiter. But from your point of view, Trish, what I understand that not every journey is smooth. So, what's been your most frustrating moment or setback that you've thought, oh, that was hard to get through when you reflect back?
Interesting. I've got, I think when I moved to London, I had been working for a number of years as a consultant and someone who had a small business with a very small team, but we were making inroads. We had successes to say, yeah, I'm capable and competent and, in this little world of small business owning. It then moved to London and entered this big bad world, and I quickly became a small fish in a big pond. And I think at that time I got quite taken aback by the fact that, I had no network all of a sudden, and someone who was always relied on contacts and network to kind of move forward. I found it quite eye-opening, to be honest, and quite maybe leveled me a little bit and kind of brought me back down to earth as someone in their late 20s who had, gone out and started a small business, on what experience, you could say. So I've hit the market in London in the agency side, and all of a sudden it was about, okay, what brand experience you have, which industry, which channel. So it was very segmented, and I felt like at the time that it was the part of me that was, the self-starting entrepreneurial piece was not getting appreciated, I suppose, by the recruitment set in the UK. But I think, that at the time I just moved forward and just got on with it. But in terms of another example that I might give that could have potentially been a very big setback, and was very frustrating at the time, because it was dealing with the reaction of someone when you're not in the wrong. And the example I'll give is when I was working for Gourmet Traveller magazine, I had a client who had a graphic designer that had to supply artwork. And the artwork that he supplied was incorrect. But he decided that was my fault, and went on to send me an abusive fax. And this is pre-email days. So he sends me this fax that goes as far as telling me that I was a pesky ad sales rep who had no idea what I was talking about, quote unquote. A little while later, he realized that he was in the wrong and he just supplied the wrong artworks to the wrong spec. A couple of months later, when I've got on board a new client, and that client was actually Sandhurst, and a nod to my resourcefulness, I called Sandhurst up one day and said, "Hi, my father, can I come and sell you some ads?" And sure enough, they said yes. So inadvertently, they needed a graphic designer. And I had been exposed to quite a number of graphic designers at the time, and said to myself, right, they need a graphic designer, but they really need a good one. What about that Fred? He was a bit of a, but he's a good designer, so I'm going to put him forward. And Fred inadvertently became the person a few years later that recommended me back to Sandhurst to become someone who could help on their marketing. And then obviously through Sandhurst, I met Mutti and this, and today we're talking. So I look back at that sliding door moment and say to myself, had I been a reaction to his reaction and decided that, what, I don't like the way you talk to me, and I'm going to take a negative response to that, and, not put you forward because of X, Y, and Z, then, I wouldn't be here today. So I look back and say, I remind myself of that valuable lesson, in that never be a reaction to someone. You never know what's going on for someone else's life. Their reaction is personal to them and not personal to you. Yeah. So I feel like that could have been a very big setback, because we wouldn't be here today. Yeah,
what a great life lesson. I love it. Jumping back into your role, Trish, and I want to just kind of give everybody a sense of what's how you do it, and in particular, it is really, I think, a unique role in terms of the business journey and how you set up the business. But what's the most important KPI for you? Because people will look at your role and think, you know, it's complex. How do you do it? But, you know, if you were to pick the one thing that you look to as an indicator of performance, what is it for you?
Look, I think the KPI for me in terms of the business as a whole, obviously outside the commercials, is the equilibrium of the team for me. And that's a KPI I measure myself on pretty much daily to say, how is the team? How is the energy in the team? Because when the team is healthy and thriving as a group, we can get up to some serious stuff and at some seriously rapid pace. And we're a small team. So, you know, not that I expect my team to be moving at extraordinarily rapid pace, but sometimes it's just part and parcel of how we have to work. So for me, you know, there's just no room for any type of energetic turbulence. And, you know, my team is my greatest asset. So I have, you know, if something's going on personally for them, then I need to make sure that they have the space to air that and feel free to deal with anything that's going on, because, you know, when we're together, we just need to get things done. So for me, equilibrium is definitely a KPI for me.
What a really interesting answer. And I bet you very few people would have guessed that. They'd have gone straight to profit or turnover growth or share, but that's really interesting. So when you look at your teams, I want to get into this a little bit, because how do you run a business like Mutti when you're up against some huge players out there, when you've got a relatively small team? How do you make that team work?
It's a very good question. I think first and foremost is manage expectations. You know, that's from the interview process on. It's, you know, everybody I've employed knows what to expect, to say that, you know, you're going to be doing strategy on one hand and potentially new line forms on the other. And we're, you know, my team is a team of senior people with years and years of experience in their functions. I think they also know to expect that they'll have visibility. So whatever they achieve, they will be seen, because there is nowhere to hide in our business. It's small. Equally, if there is a misstep or a misgiving or a failing, that'll be seen as well. So I think managing the expectations is crucial. I think also a piece around that is that we are a small business, and we are guilty of not having the processes of the, you know, larger, more established businesses, and nor does headquarters to a degree, because they're in such an evolution mode and growth mode. So it's managing the expectation around, you know, team members that might have come from more established tier ones that are stepping into our business, knowing that there's potentially going to be a fluidity in process. But on the flip side, the exciting part I've always communicated is that you get to have a hand in shaping process for our business, which is quite rare, to have a hand in a little small up and coming FMCG, and potentially shape, you know, embed your DNA in process that will be there for the longevity of the business. I think the other point would be that I acknowledge the wins. I think, you know, none of my team seek acknowledgement or need acknowledgement like anyone. They just get on with the job. But, you know, it's just really crucial to acknowledge if something has occurred, it's positive. If there's a great win, if there's a small win, just acknowledge it. How else? I'd also say that don't fake it. I try not to fake it. You know, I'm relatively new at this gig of MD, and I always say it's the job I never applied for. And it's a true privilege to be in this position, and I'm working it out myself. And I will be the first one to say, hey, I'm not sure yet, I'm working it out. Or can I get back to you? Or can you tell me a better way? So, you know, I don't like to fake it, because people smell a rat from a mile off. The third piece would be, or marked 4, is priorities. I prioritize well-being, basically. I think I said it before, if my team isn't well, not, you know, if there's something that needs to be managed for them personally or professionally, that they can have the space to communicate that, because you're only as good as the team around you. And if the team, you know, is dealing with stuff, then, you know, we got to give them the space to address. The other piece, and this is more of a nod to you, Mike, is I only bring on people that fit. And it sounds like a relatively obvious thing to say, but in a small team like ours, the fit is so important, because it has to fit and that's it. There's no room for slightly fitting, or you can kind of fit just if you're just with this cohort of people in that sub team that you're working in, you know, potentially in a larger organization, you might have that ability to peel off into smaller teams. But in our team, we are just one team, and I only must bring on people that fit, people that are capable and humble and call opportunities to themselves, and they want to contribute. And you know what, Mike, it's absolute credit to you, because you've helped me source a majority of those people. And I'm not just saying that as a clever connection to this podcast, but I do take my hat off to you, because you've been a huge support and played a huge role in that piece for me, which is absolutely crucial. Thanks,
Trish. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you on the journey so far, and long may it continue. It's interesting because when I, you know, in our business, we very clearly have sought out, as I built this business, different types of companies to work with. You know, and we've got a number of big tier ones we work with. We've got mid-sized transformational companies, and then smaller, fast growth like Mutti as well. And I think it's great to offer the options to our candidates, our future leaders, our current leaders, to say, hey, there's different things you can do in your life. It's important that you don't just stay in your lane, unless you're really comfortable in the lane, that's the only lane you want to be in. But actually, you'll not end up going perhaps as far as you could. In order to maximize your potential, so you need to move lanes and try new things, and work not just in different functions, but different types of business. So what advice would you give, Trish, when to somebody perhaps is thinking, well, I kind of enjoy my tier one world, and but there's maybe something in moving to a smaller business, but I'm not sure. You know, what advice would you give somebody who's kind of toying that up and thinking, maybe my next move should be to smaller business?
It's a good question. And I think, look, to be honest, and again, I'm not saying it just because you're interviewing me, but I think you need to really trust the person that is recruiting, is sourcing you that role. You need to trust that if they're bringing you opportunities in a smaller business, and there is that fear around jumping ship or going into something that's more slightly unknown, that they can help piece that out for you as much as possible. I think in our business, you know, it also does come down to the candidate and how much they're willing to take that risk, and what is actually motivating them to want to not take that risk, but try that new experience, because every small business will be different. Our business is operating like the way I operate, the way I've discussed as to how we operate, but that's not, the next small business might be very different. So I think it's incumbent on the recruiter to really understand what is that other business about, because it's not going to be, you know, easily kind of portrayed as you could potentially, you know, as to how that person might fit into a tier one. That small business will be very unique. So I think it's, you know, as the recruiter, they need to be bridging that gap between, you know, what is the known and what is very unknown and unique to that particular business, you know, because every opportunity that candidate gets will be different, depending on which business is being put forward to them. Yeah.
I often think of it in terms of, you know, how much change and contrast do you want? You know, if you're, you know, is it 5% different, or is it 50% different? You know, and that's always an interesting way to look at it, because sometimes you need big contrasts in your experience. Sometimes you need smaller contrasts, and be able to understand, well, what does that 5 or 50% look like? What is going to be different, and is it going to be different, exciting, or different, too scary? You know, and being able to kind of figure your way through that. So it is, but you know, I strongly encourage people to think about their, I think it was Robbie Lawson talked about it last year, about a career safari, which is amazing, you know, because career ladders, you said, are really boring. And career safaris are much more interesting, because you imagine yourself going along, grabbing experiences that are different as you go. And that's what's going to make you the best version of you.
I think also, to add to that, as someone who runs a small business, I think the candidate should be very cognizant of that. Entering a small business is a big move for the small business. So if you're taking on someone that's coming from a tier one, and there is perhaps that hesitation about entering a small business, that, you know, I think you can enter it and make the decision still with a little bit of that seed of, have I made the right choice? But, you know, if there is a seed of doubt that's beyond the seed, you shouldn't jump, because it's a quite a lengthy and taxing process for small business in terms of you investing so heavily, quite emotionally, in trying to find the right resource in a small team. And if that person joins and decides it's not for them 6 months later, that's quite a challenging proposition for the business owner to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, leading a business can be a lonely job, and you mentioned before, for instance, this is you haven't got this classic FMCG training, Trish. You're still newish to your role of MD, clearly doing a very good job. But where do you get your support and advice from when you haven't got this big infrastructure around you?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I've most definitely sensed the loneliness in periods of time over the years, and I think I'm very well versed at it because it's been the majority of my career I'd been consulting. So you've always felt like that person who is on the outside, ad hoc jumping into a team or a business, semi-connected, but always on the outer. So that is quite a lonely proposition. I think, we look at the day-to-day of my role at the moment. I have support from my counterpart in Italy, which has been for the last 11 years. We've been side by side on a daily basis. And, from that basic level, functionally, I get that support there. I also have a close mentoring relationship with our global CFO, who, really fosters my leadership abilities and values my contribution to, the group and the progression of the group strategically going forward, which is, quite a nice, I suppose, thing to have as a support, because it's it gives that confidence to know that the value is there. And I'll also say, again, not because you're interviewing me, Mike, but you have been an incredible support to me, in the sense that when I've stepped out to start hiring people to join this business, it's an extremely scary proposition, because one particular role I did recruit through you was one that was peeling off the function that I'm most capable at, and the function that I've built the business to the point at which I did before I started taking on people, which is the sales component. So hiring a head of sales was a very daunting prospect, because that person really needed to be capable to allow me to let go to the degree that I could start stepping back and manage the business and lead the business and look more holistically at growth. So I think, you've supported me immensely, not just in that role, but in all the other roles that you've recruited, but even to the degree that I've had to, I remember calling you once and said, Mike, I think at the time I get a mentor, because, I've got people in play now. I can step back. I need to hone my leadership skills. I need to start learning about things that I don't know about or should know about. What do you suggest? So I'm sure we've had about a dozen of those types of conversations. And, I think you suggested a mentor, that's even one of your upcoming interviewees. So it's, again, I'm not saying that just because we're talking, but you've been an extremely, extremely huge support for me.
Thanks, Trish. It's kind of you to say so. I really appreciate it.
I'm giving you a lot of kudos in this call.
You are. I did. I'm not fishing for it, but thank you. Hey, and another thing I wanted to get into as well. I know we're getting towards the end of our session, but I'm sure we've got time for another couple of questions. And guys, there is a chat facility there, so if you want to jump on and ask questions, you've got about 5 minutes. So be quick. But sometimes when a business is growing fast, there's a risk, I guess, you lose control, and there's a fine line between, almost going too fast and keeping control of the train, if you like. But how do you manage it?
It's a really good question, and absolutely, you can grow too fast and can grow out of control. And it's a delicate balance between how do you scale and go after what you can see is there, but how do you do it in a considered manner? And again, it comes back to my team. If I sense there's this pressure point and a boiling point that, is that there's too much going on, then we have to go, right, how do we prioritize? Because we can't do it all. And you're one person doing this function, which is, from pillar to post in most cases, from, like I mentioned before. So it's about how do you prioritize, basically, and how do you plan, annual business rhythm, which again, we're in the process of bedding down that type of process in our business. So we can be a little bit more planned out and considered year to year. But again, it comes back down to my team and understanding if I sense there's a boiling point, then I know we're going too far. You know, we can only do what we can do in the time that we have. And there's no point doing it in a frantic state or feeling like you're about to crack because there's too many things on the go. So yeah, it's about, it comes back to that equilibrium piece.
I get the sense with you and the business, Trish, that your decision making in the business is pretty good, because I think a lot of people look at smaller businesses and think, oh, they try everything and they fail fast, and they, they'll run up 100 alleyways and knowing that one will eventually be a success. But I don't think that's the way you run your business. I think you're much more measured and controlled in what you do and what you decide to do. You land your MPDs, you kind of, it's not about having 1,000 ideas. It's about being very clear on what good looks like and what your strategy is, and therefore you make your decisions within that framework. And I think that would surprise a lot of people when they look at smaller business. They assume they're headless, and it's just about running around in chaos. And I get the sense that's not you or your business.
No, I think it's about sustainable growth. And we have to be accountable to our headquarters, and we've got our targets. And when we launch innovation, it's not just what can we expand and extend into, and how can we expand range. It's about what's going to last and be valuable to the consumer, because it's very costly if we get it wrong. And yeah, it is considered, because I think the other part of it is we are growing very significantly and fast. So I suppose in the absence of that, perhaps I might be different. But in this context where we are growing quickly, we can be measured, because we assume, knock on wood, I shouldn't talk too soon, that growth is still happening and will happen for the next couple of years. Not, I wouldn't say as fast, but potentially, fast enough. So perhaps that's playing a part as well, in that, we can afford to be a little bit measured, because we know that we're getting propelled forward by that piece around the consumer really taking the brand.
Brilliant. Question in from the chat, Yvette Gordony. Knowing what you know now, Trish, and where you are now, is there anything you would have done differently? The hindsight question, as she frames it.
Oh, that's a good question. Would anything that I would have done differently? It's a really hard question to answer. I think for me, the recruitment process, I've learnt a lot through that over the years, and I've learnt the hard way around how do you as a business owner run the best type of process for the best type of outcome. So I think I might have been a little bid more diligent in years gone by, in terms of that process. I was a little bit knee-jerk in a couple of instances. So I'd suggest that would potentially be one area. Great.
That has been super interesting, Trish. Wonderful insights there into Mutti as a business, and I think for a lot of people look at smaller businesses and particularly those that are growing fast and think, how do they do it? How does that work? And I think you've been really honest and just giving us some insight into how you work. The importance of your team, I think that's absolutely critical, and probably enhanced even more in a smaller business. But as you start to grow, every person that makes an enormous difference to you. And I think you've attracted some amazing people in your business, Trish. But I'm really excited to see where the journey goes, and the growth might not be quite as incredible over the next few years, but there's no doubt it will continue. So amazing stuff, Trish. Now, for next up was session one, and today's today kicked us off, but we've got another 19 sessions to come as the year goes on. We've got Jeff Mckenzie, who's the commercial director of Pernod Ricard. He's up on April 14 on the live session, and as I mentioned before, each session is going to have a bit of a theme to it. And in Jeff's session, we're going to discuss whether organizations are getting it right and adapting their structures and developing talent for the future. Now, that's really interesting for me as somebody who's passionate about talent development and why this program exists. So I think anybody with a growth mindset, you want to be in that session next. But so everybody on the live call, thank you for joining us this morning. Trish, once again, absolute superstar. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
as well.
Mike. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All the best, guys.
Thanks.